In this video, we complete step 38, automatically add documentation. So in this step, we are going to automatically add documentation, which means doc strings, to several methods. So these are the methods that we're going to automatically add the documentation to. And in fact, this particular step is actually already complete, so there's no additional coding that will be needed, but I will explain exactly what happens. So just to give a little rehash on the doc strings before I actually go into this method right down here, let me take a let me scroll up a little bit to go into the pivot table method, which we just completed. So the pivot table method has a doc string like this. It has all the parameters, has a small description, it has a return section. So this is a literal Python string, and this is not just useful for the developers. This is actually very useful for the users of our library, because the doc strings are able to be viewed as a user whenever you're coding in an environment such as VS Code or Jupyter Notebook or many other environments. So let's go take a look at what I mean when I say that. So if we go ahead and go back to the test notebook, so df, if I call the pivot table method, or if I bring it up without calling it, and I put a single question mark at the end, Jupyter Notebook will pull up this window, this little pop-up window at the bottom of the screen, and it will show us the documentation string. So the users can easily pull it up. So that's very nice. Now, you can also access the doc string by pressing Shift-Tab-Tab. So if I press Shift-Tab-Tab, this will also pop up the doc string. And this is actually what I use when I'm using libraries in the Jupyter Notebook. I am pressing Shift-Tab-Tab frequently, as it is a great way to quickly get the documentation string. And there's no way to memorize all the possibilities for all the methods and functions that are available. So the doc strings are very valuable to quickly get help while you're coding. Now, if we look back up to the aggregation functions, aggregation methods, you'll notice that there are no doc strings here. So there's nothing under these. Oh, sorry, those are not the aggregation functions. But if I go up a little bit further up, where we get to our previous ag funcs. So here we go. So we have min, max, mean, median, sum, all those. You notice there are no there are no doc strings available here. There's nothing that was written here. But yet, if I go and say I want to call the min method, and let me just pull this up, there in fact is a doc string. So how did that get there? How did a doc string get there when it's not clearly visible in the code? Well, the answer lies in a special attribute called dunderDoc. So you can actually retrieve the doc strings as a special method, this doc special method, dunderDoc, and it's just like any other attribute. This is just a normal Python string that it's assigned to this variable. So this is how you can dynamically set your doc strings, is with this dunderDoc special attribute. And that's exactly what I did in the code to go ahead and add all those doc strings to all these aggregation methods. So what I noticed was when I was building this code is that all these aggregation methods have very similar, they're going to have very similar doc strings. So instead of writing that same thing over and over again, I decided to define a method that will automatically add documentation. And that's what this entire step is all about. It's about automatically adding documentation. So the first thing I did was to assign a list of all of the methods that I would like to automatically add documentation to. So these are all these aggregation method names. And then I had a generic doc string, which is a string. So I assigned it to a variable called agdoc. So this is just a string It has these braces in here which signify something important, and that is that I can replace whatever the contents of these braces with a variable. So that'll come up, that'll be important later. But this is the doc string. So I'm making a very simple doc string. Find the blank of each column. So blank will be one of these once we fill it in. So what we do here is we're going to iterate through all of these names. Okay, so for name and ag names, what we're going to do is we're going to, from our data frame, we're going to use getAttr to retrieve the method using a string. So we have our data frame class. We're going to retrieve the method, and then of that method's dunder_doc attribute, we will reassign. So we're going to reassign it to ag_doc, which is this string, but we are going to fill in those braces. We're going to replace those braces. So this is what the format method for strings allows you to do, and we're going to replace it with name, whatever the current name is. So for the first one, it'll say find the min of each column. So that's what this add_docs method is doing. It's conveniently creating documentation automatically to several methods. So instead of having to repeat it over and over again, we're just going to have one single method to add all of this documentation. So this only really works whenever you have methods that have, basically essentially the same documentation, just with, a very small difference, like the name of it. So then you can do this and just replace each method's dunder_doc attribute with whatever string you want the doc string to be. So you might be wondering when this thing actually gets invoked, and this happens in the constructor. So in one of the very first steps, we very quickly glanced over this. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll up to the constructor, just so that you can see where this gets executed. And it gets executed right here. So the very last line of the constructor, we're going to call this this add_docs method, which will go through all of those aggregation methods and add documentation to them by overriding the dunder_doc attribute. Okay, so that's a little special trick on how to to change the doc strings dynamically, and how to automatically add documentation to many methods at once. And that completes step 38.